that's one of the stories, and I wrote down the title, Why Lawyers Make Good Coaches. And it's an extremely good story because it always impressed me that I don't know how much or if John Cooper's played or even how much you played, but it really isn't that important. It's having all the tools that go into what it requires. So I'm looking forward to editing that. But one person that we didn't get to introduce herself, we'll get her to introduce to you. Kim McCullough is on, and you might know Kim.
Oh, I know Kim.
Yeah, probably recruited a few of her players, but she may not have to tell you too much about herself. You know her that well, but Kim, if you could introduce yourself and if you have any questions or thoughts or anything to add, go ahead.
Well, yeah, thanks, Wally. Matt and I go way back. So, and I've been out to Kingston a couple times to learn from Matt. So I've done that with my own professional development, I guess. But I think a couple things jumped out at me. I one of the things I like most about Matt is that his dad is always around and helping out, and it reminds me a lot of me and my dad's relationship. And I know one of the other PWHL coaches had the same thing, Jeff, out in Cambridge, and I love that piece of it. I'm very fortunate to have that, and I always say that our Matt and I, our dads are really running the show. We're just the puppets. We don't really know what's going on. The old guys are getting it done. But and yes, Matt has actually, he'll have 3 of my former players, I think, next year, and 3 great ones, great people and great hockey players. And the things that always struck me with Matt are the professionalism, which he alluded to, and the integrity. So the way things are done at Queens are done that way because of Matt. And I always think when my players ask me about Queens and the potential of going there, I always think it's a great opportunity for them. But I did have a question for you, Matt, because you spoke about being calm under stress. And that's something that I'm also quite good at, but I find that my players are not quite good at. So we might serve as examples for them, role models for them. But I find quite often when, the fit hits the shan, as they say, I tend to go to one place and be quite centered and like loving it. Meanwhile, they're in panic mode. So I think I take for granted that that's part of my personality, and I'm very comfortable in those, murky waters, and they're not. So how do you, other than setting a good example for them, how do you help teach them that? Because, some of them may go on to be lawyers, but they haven't done it yet. So any advice on, I know you're coaching players that are slightly older than mine, but, still in the relatively same age group. So any suggestions?
Great to see you. And yeah, you're totally right. My dad is the unofficial mayor of wherever he happens to be at the moment, and has been a great inspiration for me. And I'm certainly lucky and fortunate that my parents moved to Kingston, and that I can include him in this part of the journey. So, and also back to you with respect to your program. I mean, there's a reason why, we've had, a few former players of Kim's on our team, is because I recognize, the development that they get before the next level. And that's a huge part for me when I'm recruiting players is, I don't want to spend all kinds of time working on their attitude or their work ethic. I just want to get them into our systems and get going. And it's been a pretty consistent attribute, I guess, of the players that have been coached by Kim, and that they're ready to go. I don't have to worry about those things. So, to your question, yeah, great question. I mean, it's a great question, and example, do your best to lead by example, and that does, after a little bit of time, that does rub off. They see how I react, and then how I hold them accountable if they don't react in a similar way. And so, that does take some time with some players. Some of them get it after a couple of days. Some of them it takes almost 4 or 5 years to get them there. But that whole concept of and I'll take a step back. It also affects, I think, how I recruit. Like I try to get as much information I can about players and do my best to get players that I think, sort of fit that mold from the outset. But it's that whole calming the brain, and there's I guess the different parts in of hockey that'll come to play. I mean, there's after a tough shift, and they get onto the bench and they're just riled up, right? They're either internally just wired, or they're chatting to or complaining to their teammates or to the coaches. You just see that they're going a mile a minute. So that's one part of it. But the other part is just calming the brain on the ice, right? And I'm sure you guys have probably touched on this with other talks that you've had about, just trying to slow the game down and create space in your brain so you can create space on the ice. And I think they're linked. I think if you can teach your athlete to slow things down from that perspective, or calm the brain, I think you're going to have benefits on the bench, in the dressing room, but also on the ice in the middle of a shift. I'll be honest with you, Kim, I'm constantly chasing that golden goose. Like we've worked on bringing in mental skills coaches. I've probably read every book on the subject that I can think about. There's basic ones like breathing techniques on the bench, and getting them into the green, and when they start getting into the yellow and the red. And every player has a different technique to do that, and takes different time to do that. So I think that's one thing that I have learned, is that I think when I was trying to tackle this early, I was trying to do a sort of one size fits all, what seems right for me kind of approach. And I think that's maybe 50% of it, but the other 50% is really trying to drill down and get to know the player and find out what gets them into the red, and hopefully what can get them down into the green. And some of them just need to be left alone, just like a pat on the shoulder, or just walk over to them and just quickly say, change channels, or whatever buzzword maybe you've worked out with them. Others require, in between periods, you take them and the assistant coach aside, and you just have a quick little 30 or 40-second talk. And some of them require a full-on hour-long meeting, with them and your assistant coach sometime during the week to talk about it. So it's kind of a blend of trying to find those general ideas that are out there, and basically give them a toolbox to hopefully choose from, and some ideas that they haven't used before, but also, trying to drill down and seeing what you can do on an individual basis. But I can't honestly point to one thing and say, here's the answer. I think it's kind of a combination of all those, but it starts with here's my expectations. Here's why I think those expectations are beneficial for you and the team, and obviously modeling that behavior to the best of my ability.
Matt and Kim, I just want to interrupt, because Dave King used to send me to the theory certification clinics. Now, it's not like going to law school and practicing it, but it is the highest formal form of education required if you're going to coach on an Olympic team. And I went to Toronto and sat in on 2 modules, mental training for coaches, and a separate model, mental training for athletes. I took that module back home and incorporated it in my high school phys ed curriculum, grade 10, 11, and 12. And then I applied it in teams I coached, and I basically volunteered to take over a high-level ringette team because I was coaching my daughters at the younger age group, totally for the reason of completing the task required to get past those modules. Both teams won the national championships that year. I accredit it to the module, which was totally based on emotional control, and it applies to coaches and applies to athletes. So, without getting into it, I'd be happy to Kim to share that stuff with you. And I may have already shared part of it with you, Matt, but I do have it. It's one of those toolbox things that I've always tried to give away, but when you're in the heat of the battle coaching, it's really hard to absorb information and practice it until you've lived it yourself. And I had time to do that. So that's just something I had to offer. Go ahead, Kim. And any other?
Well, yeah, I just had sort of to follow up on that, I was listening to a podcast yesterday with Dan Church. It's actually it's a really good podcast. My friend started it. I started coaching with her. It's called Coach Life 2.0. She's been interviewing a lot of coaches in the female game, in female sport in general, for the most part. So Ken Dufton's on there, Lisa Haley, MJ, who runs it, used to coach with me at Peak way back in the day. But when I was listening to the recording with Dan last night, he was talking about the evolution of the female game, and sort of he's been around it, I guess, similar timeline as Matt, but sort of that first wave of elite level players coming in the late 90s, when we started, and I don't know if I'd call myself elite, but I would put myself in that group of the first wave. And since then, the skill level has gone up exponentially in the female game, and I think anyone who's been in the female game would agree with that. And Dan's comment in the podcast was that those who had elite level mental game back then would still have that elite level mental game now, whereas the elite level skill we possessed in the late 90s probably doesn't translate quite as directly to now, right? So that those mental skills are a little bit more transferable across the ages of women's hockey. But I was curious, from your perspective, Matt, especially getting players, out of programs such as ours, coming in, I'm constantly telling players the advantage of having that strong mental game when they go to the next level, right? So, I'm doing junior to university, but anyone else here could be going, university to pro, or, pro to Olympic team, or whatever that looks like. How have you seen players adjust mentally in that way? And the players who already have those, like you said, the toolbox, what's the advantage that gives them, from a performance perspective when they're a rookie or a freshman?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I mean, it's not overly measurable per se, but you know it when you see it, I suppose. And I agree. Like, I think that even 10 years ago, most teams had one or two lines, for example, that were kind of high end or good skill, and then the third and fourth lines were ones that could be picked on, basically. Now most teams have depth to have four solid lines, and the skill level is really crunched into the middle, if I can put it that way, or raised to the point where it's there's not a lot separating a good fourth liner from a good second liner at this point. So those not soft skills, but those other areas become even more crucial than I think in previous years. So sleep, nutrition, but I think the mental skills remains. It's got to be one of the top, and it is a huge focus for us. We've got a full-time, or actually two full-time mental skills coaches that are available to the players, either one-on-one or as a team. And then we've also just added in the last year a mental health coach. And I found that's made a huge difference, because I think those things used to be kind of bundled in. And so you'd have a mental skills coach trying to deal with resiliency or mental toughness. And really, you've got a player that's suffering from anxiety. And there's overlap, absolutely. But I found that's been a bit of a game changer for us. So we can make referrals to our mental health coach, and she is dealing with issues like anxiety, depression, and it's a bit more of a clinical. And at that point, I am hands off. Like, it is, I might be involved in the mental skills coach approach and what they're going over, but as soon as it gets into the mental health, I'm involved in the referral, but then it's almost become a doctor-patient scenario. And so I think that was a critical separation of things, I think, for us. And so, the mental part is in my mind, it is just as important as, what our breakout is and what our X's and O's are. And I would say we probably spend as much time talking to the players as a team and individually about their mental approach to the game as we do, again, talking over systems. It's and again, it's kind of, as a head coach, you're kind of jack of all trades, masters of none, and so I'm you know, I know what I know, and from experience, and I've read and learned, and all the different seminars and programs and other coaches. But I'm certainly happy that we have dedicated people that will will take the ball the rest of the way. And there's no doubt. There's again, with skill level being so tightly bunched right now, the players that have that mental toughness, that resiliency, that practice areas like imagery, just areas like that. And again, it's not a one size fits all, but players that have that edge are, there's no doubt they're consistently some of our top players, and it's no secret that they eventually become our captains and our leaders. And players that, I mean, I've had players that have been here for 5 years and they've struggled with it the whole time, and they just there's a lot of unfortunate untapped potential if they can't add that part to their game.
I think it's great that you have a mental health coach. I agree. Those are two separate things that probably have been looped together. And I think it's great. We have so many resources. I think back to when I played, and there were no skills coaches. Like, you went to hockey camp or you had a hockey coach, right? There was no, skills coach per se, or certainly mental skills coach. And I wonder how much of that now is, like, if I go to a skills coach to work on my shot, right? My parents pay the money. It's a X amount of dollars. It's scheduled, whatever, versus me doing it on my own, out of my own volition, out of my own creation of what that skills program looks like. And I would argue, as a coach, I'm more impressed by the person who's doing it on their own, who's come up with their own program. While, the skills instructor will be able to give, those cues. And I think the same goes for the mental side. Right. And I'm similar to you. I'm constantly filling their mental toolbox. We're doing breathing, we're doing imagery, we're doing visualization, we're watching video. But I think the ones who really get ahead on it, no different than the players doing extra skill stuff out of their own, self-direction. Right. So, I can go to a mental skills coach and say, fix me, just like I can go to a skills coach and say, fix me.
Yeah.
Versus me actually fixing myself. And I think that's, whether it's hockey performance or mental performance, I think that's the difference. And and again, the players I've seen who are, truly elite on the mental side are the ones who are doing, the visualization before the game, or, writing their goals down, or they're not waiting for Coach Kim to say, okay, guys, here's our visual. Like, I think It's great that we're filling that toolbox, but I wonder how much we're becoming over-reliant on specialists, right? To say, oh, you've got to do this, or you've got to do this, or you're not, I think of in Toronto, how many kids only ever do skills with a skills instructor, and the amount of money this must cost. And B, I am also one of those skills instructors, so I'm in some ways okay with it. But like, I don't think I ever went to a skills instructor other than going to hockey camp. Like,
yeah.
So I just think it's an interesting concept, and I think it's great that we keep giving these athletes the resources and access, and I think it's necessary. But I hope we don't lose that self-starter, self-directed work, and because I still believe those are the athletes who are getting ahead, even when all these resources are out there now, that weren't there for us, 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, it's the theory of skill acquisition, and you've got to struggle through it and FIO, figure it out on your own. And that's when it becomes more ingrained, more of a habit, and as opposed to do this, right? And I agree. I think that works for both physical skills and for mental skills as well. Your point about physical skills now, I mean, there's you can literally look up in a minute how to skate, how to take a shot. Like, there's certainly, and it may not help folks like yourself that run programs still physically, but you can find anything you want on the internet now. Now, some of it's bad information, some of it's good, but yeah, these players could easily, or certainly a lot more easily, develop the physical skills on their own. And, the mental part, I mean, you can read some TED Talks or go on. I mean, there's stuff out there, but your concept is, or thought is bang on. Again, I found that those players that come to me that have already thought about the mental side of the game, have already searched out what works for them, trial and error, they're ready to go. And I still feel it's part of our responsibility to remind them of the importance of skills training. I still think it's part of our responsibility to give them options. Absolutely, it's part of our responsibility to remain there if we observe some issues or a struggle, or if they see, reach out and ask for help for it. But if there's a way to, let them come to that point on their own, I think that carries more weight. I agree.
I just want to mention one thing. I've always felt the sports psychologist has to be you. And you may have somebody to work with you, but how you coach, you are the one affecting how they're going to feel, how they're going to control their mindset. And so all of the tools will probably come from you. The idea of handing off the mental training side to a specialist, this is usually what occurs. And I think the ability to be able to, from the get-go, create a routine of dealing with adversity and coping with adversity. This is available, done in the first early part of the season and reviewed again at Christmas, 2 sessions. It works. And I just say, Dave King used to say, the players don't need a sports psychologist, the coaches do. The stress on coaching at the competitive level, it's amazing. And I'm looking at what's happening right now with the Calgary Flames and the mental trainer that I know, Dr. Matt Brown, who's at the Ed School. And I wonder whether he's even involved in the nuances of all that's going on there. But, the business of hockey, that's one thing. I'm more concerned about the educational side, the student athlete side, and the growth and development side here. But excellent, Kim and Matthew.